A new, much more complicated damage and medical system is being tested on Vulture currently. This is in early states and has, I would say, a lot of unintended and just unfinished things. For example, the system right now only has pain, wounds, and very basic surgery. And this is a step into making combat a more punishing system overall. Fixing up damage and suffering damage is now a much more long term thing to both heal and in order to recover from in general. Wounds are no longer just healed purely by raw healing numbers, meaning that if you take certain forms of internal damage, it doesn't matter how many magical reagents of juice you stick into your body, it's not going to heal. You will require surgery to fix these things. The things that you're going to notice immediately is that your health is no longer health, it is labeled as heart rate, and you also now have a pain indicator. So, of course, when you spawn, you'll have 0 damage, which means you have normal heart rate and 0 pain. You're pain free. If you examine yourself with a health analyzer, things get scary real fast. Most of these numbers are not actually anything you have to be super scared of, everything kind of ties in together. Brain activity is the most important thing in the game now. If your brain activity hits 0%, you are basically the equivalent of rotted. Your body is screwed. Your pain is practically directly tied to heart rate as far as I can tell. As long as your heart is beating and pumping blood to your brain, you will not suffer brain death. As long as your heart health remains healthy, your heart will be beating unless your heart is stopped through other methods. Such that your heart can stop through a ton of damage, too much pain, which are pretty much tied together, asphyxiation, and a lack of blood. So, well, not dive super deep into everything because it's a rather complicated system. I spent several hours messing with this as much as I could. I could have put this video out quicker, but I am somebody who likes to at least have a decent idea what I'm talking about before I just throw out a video. But let's just do a very basic wound test. If I cut myself with a 17 damage saber, I will immediately suffer some pain. I will suffer some damage. I am naturally healing it, so let's do a little bit more damage so I stop naturally healing it. So I went from no pain to moderate pain. There is a step in between. On a health analyzer, you will also immediately see that your heart rate is going up as a result of pain, and blood saturation is actually not being affected, even though I am bleeding slightly, because I'm really not bleeding all that much. Bleeding is a lot different than it was before. You have to bleed a lot and have severe bleeding. If you shift click and examine yourself, you'll see you have bleeding jagged cuts from the sword. I'm also dripping blood as an indication that I am actively bleeding, but the real point here is that I have taken 33.8 points of damage. Now, before, you could fully heal yourself with bruise packs or any like a medicated suture. This is no longer the case. However, topicals no longer just heal a small amount of damage. As you can see, there's a pop-up saying you heal your moderate cut. When I do this, I will heal a decent bit of damage, which is pretty much the same damage as before, but my pain level has lowered immediately because I've dealt with a wound, I have taken less damage, and the amount of damage it takes to crit is no longer just a set 100. We'll get into that in a second. Also, if I shift click myself, we'll see that I have a bandage cut and a singular jagged cut. You can stack up a lot of wounds. If you get stabbed like 10 times, you'll have to bandage yourself practically 10 times. I don't think it's quite as even as that is. And now, since I have patched myself up, I am no longer bleeding. I still have this damage, and I can no longer use the bruise pack to heal. As you see, it says there are no wounds left to tend, meaning now if I want to recover, I will now have to use reagents. No surgery is necessary because I have nothing internally wrong with me whatsoever. So if I just inject myself with some bicardine, there will now actually be a reagent list on your menu here. It'll tell you how much is currently in your body, and it'll tell you what this patient has already metabolized. And this number you don't actually have to worry about. In testing, it doesn't seem like it actually contributes to the OD amount. It's just a white number that contributes to overdosing. This just lets you know if somebody was like drugged, for example, or what was in their system that is causing the damage to let you get a better idea of how to prepare for treatment. So now I will be fully healed. My pain is back to pain free. My heart rate's good. Everything is good to go. Now, just to give an example, I'm just going to keep stabbing myself until I reach a critical state. Damage is a lot different in this regard. I struggle to keep my eyes open at 50 damage. I have now taken moderate damage, or I'm now have in moderate pain. The bicardine is healing me a little bit. Now, I will just keep stabbing myself to give a better example. My heart rate is now poor. My pain is now severe. I am now slowed down. One more stab. I am now in severe pain. My heart rate still remains bad. I actually have not managed to cause any major surgical required wounds. I don't have any arteries or arterial bleeds. If I stab myself again, We are now in awful heart rate. My pain still remains severe. I am very slowed down now. Stab myself once more. I have fallen over, and it is coincidentally right around 100 damage. However, I'm not out of the fight or whatever entirely. My actual vitals are still fine, surprisingly. There's a bit of RNG to whether or not wounds will end up causing you to have like arterial bleeding and stuff. Even, like a high slash weapon like this actually does have a pretty decent chance of doing it in my testing. As you just saw, I did just stand back up because pain does somewhat subside on its own. However, my heart rate is still in an awful condition. So, whenever you reach blackout pain, you don't fully black out, you just slump over. I have now pushed myself into a dangerous level of damage here. You are practically going to need help when you have reached this level of damage. You can still move and still get yourself out of the worst situations. However, if you've taken this much damage, it was probably a result of a fight. But if you're like in a gunfight with a nuki or something and they don't have the time to finish you off, you could potentially crawl around a door or something. You could potentially still get yourself out of danger. But before in this system, you would have just been critical, gasping for air and dying without any help. Surprisingly, due to the fact I have no arterial bleeds and I'm still conscious and my heart's still beating, I'm not really in mortal danger still. As bad as this looks, it is actually not the worst thing ever. If you use something like an emergency medipen, the emergency medipen actually has painkillers and epinephrine in it, which will give you adrenaline. If you inject yourself with this will lower your pain levels. So I went from blackout to severe. My heart rate is going back to stabilize because I'm no longer in as much pain and I'm giving myself adrenaline. And adrenaline even lets you move back at full speed. So having painkillers and even things like epinephrine and inoperivline. Well, inoperivline is not doing much right now for me, but the paracetamol and the epinephrine are both acting as pain relievers and adrenaline. My rate is actually now back to normal for a few seconds because I'm now just purely on pain meds to manage the pain. Even though I have this much damage, my vitals are actually totally fine. Well, we'll examine here as soon as my pain meds wear off that my severe pain is going to turn back into blackout pain because I haven't actually treated any of my actual wounds. I'm just ignoring the symptoms. And yes, immediately back to blackout pain, heart rate back in the shitter because the blood or your pain levels are pretty much directly tied to heart rate. So, without actually tending the medicine, you can use painkillers and stuff to temporarily stave off just dying. You will get to a point though where it doesn't really matter how many painkillers you have, you would just have too much damage and too much pain. So I'll just hit myself again with the sword. It's going to knock it out of my hand. Also, your like attack rate and interaction rate is severely crippled while you're in this state. Surprisingly, I am still not suffering any major internal damage. I'll just keep going until I just can't go anymore. We are now 164 damage. My heart is getting dangerously close to stopping. Basically, I'm almost at the original death value, which 200 damage was death before this, but I am still not even dead. You technically don't die until you suffer actual brain death. You guess you would be legally dead with no heart rate, but I am going to basically hit 200 damage. There we go. No, wait. I finally suffered. The heart was beating too much. Now we will cover very quick basic wound treatment for somebody who is in a critical condition. Say somebody like this was slashed to pieces and they actually haven't suffered any wounds, like it will say arterial bleeding or broken bones. If you don't see any messages appear, this person actually does not require surgery to get back on their feet. Immediately, you'll notice that since their heart is not beating, they are suffering brain damage. There is a new chemical called mannitol. Mannitol will actually allow a person to recover some brain damage. This is very important. You don't want your patients having brain death. You can inject up to 10 units of this, and it heals a small amount of brain damage. I will just inject all 10 units into them, and we'll notice even though their heart is not beating, their brain activity is slowly still going down, but it's also keeping it stabilized. It's giving us more time to deal with their current wounds. Things like epinephrine are also amazing in this after this change. Epinephrine, what it will do is it will cause adrenaline, which, as we saw, does help with pain management, and it also will force the heart to beat, or has a chance of forcing the target's heart to beat. When they are this damaged, it is not going to do all that much to really help them. I'll just inject epinephrine, and we'll see that it is not actually directly helping right now. If we use a defib on them before they actually like have their wounds treated. So since we had epinephrine in their system and we shocked them back with a defib, we have actually managed to get their heart to start again. It is not going to last long. I think basically as soon as the epinephrine wears off, they are going to suffer damage again, or they're going to suffer heart failure again and start suffering more brain damage. However, since we have the mannitol in there, we are recovering their brain activity, even though we have failed to actually treat the problem. So now the epi has worn off, and that means that their adrenaline has worn off. They are surprisingly have had their heart still going. It's because their heart health is still decently okay. They haven't suffered like major heart like failure. Like the heart itself is still okay. However, as you see, once things wear off fully and they take too much pain, they are back in trouble. So before this change, you would assume that this person was in a critical state. However, if they scan them and their status still says alive, chems like inaprovaline will actually not do anything because they are not actually in a critical state. We could actually do more damage to this person to basically force them into a critical state. Now we have actually caused them a surgery wound, which is perfect. This is exactly what I want to demonstrate. Now they are in a critical state, and now you can use things like in-app to help stabilize this person. So we can give them 10 units of in-app, and we could give them some more mannitol just to help keep the, oops, not drink it, use things like mannitol in-app together to help further stabilize these people. This is something paramedics are really going to have to do in order to make sure their patients can survive long enough to actually get proper medical treatment. You can use things as a paramedic like bruise packs as well, because you apply bruise packs really quick on them. So if I shift click and examine them, we'll see they now have a ton of jagged cuts, bandage cuts, and as we use an entire bruise pack on them, we have healed actually 40 damage worth of slash damage here, which will make it easier to get them back. They are no longer in a critical state because we are now applying proper medical treatment and using things to help stabilize them. However, their heart is still failed, so you are going to want to try to inject basic things like bicaridine to try to just help them with damage. You're also going to want to use things like paracetamol, as we were using earlier, like in the emergency pen, to help deal and manage, to help them deal and manage with their pain. Because if we can get them to stop suffering so much pain, we can get them to get out of their heart failure. It's not going to happen on its own, though. That's what epi is good for. So now we are actively treating their damage. We have given them pain meds. So now if we are to give them some epi, we'll give them 10 units of epi. And we'll shock them to get their heart going again. Actually, we didn't even have to do it. They actually have managed to stand back up on their own because we have given them enough painkillers. The adrenaline is helping their heart beat again, and it's help recovering their brain activity. This person is still not out of the woods, though. This is why medical treatment is a lot more complicated now, because you can't just magically know, okay, I did 5% enough pain medication, their heart's going to restart. As we see, they just slump back over because the pain meds have worn off, but the adrenaline and the epi is keeping their heart beating. So now they have nothing going through their system properly, not even mannitol. Now, trying to actually triage this and deal with this in a real, like, active shooter situation in actual space station gameplay is going to be hell. You don't have all that much time to really stop somebody from permadying, even in this perfect controlled environment where I have every chem I need. In this was this like 10 minutes I've been talking, this person's already suffered half brain death, and they are really not even that injured. This was just from cut wounds over time. So this is a part of the treatment process where I get a little confused. Their heart is beating, they're breathing, but they're still suffering brain death. And I think at this point it's just because their blood has hit all poor and their heart health itself is bad just because of the arterial bleeding, and like we haven't really treated their wounds. So we'll move on to the second part of this, and this is surgery. This is why as a paramedic, getting your patient to a surgery room is incredibly important. Putting somebody on a surgical bed basically stops their pain entirely, and that can allow you to make sure they don't suffer further brain death. It's a little glitchy because like this person here, I'll just swap to their body. They are not in pain, so they technically don't seem like they should have any issue of not being able to move. But if you unbuckle yourself, you just immediately go into blackout pain and your heart immediately goes back into a critical state. You could kind of force yourself back on the table, but you're more or less unconscious at this point. Like you're technically stable, but you're only stable on the bed. Also implemented with this are IV stands. So for a normal human, you just get an IV bag of blood, you put it on the stand, and then you click drag the stand onto this person, and this will help us recover their blood while I am operating on them. It's you can immediately see that their blood saturation is getting a little bit better. It's not like the highest. It's not like an immediately like, oh, I'm just going to save their life because I have the IV in, but You can also tell when the IV is actually in, because if you look at the sprite, there's a line going to them, and we have not actually solved their arterial bleeding, but we are slowly helping again further stabilize them. Just as a reminder, everything is slower now with this system. You can't just magically treat people with, like, without actual major work. And if you right click somebody, you can also see that there's a remove IV button. So to begin surgery, you just have to pretty much, I think all surgeries start with a scalpel. You get a scalpel and you can right click them, and then you could do perform surgery. And we are right now, for example, doing an arterial bleeding treatment. So you click this and you click perform surgery. You could follow this list without needing to click this button, but in case you forget, you have to shift click them now, and it's like building, like a building. You just follow the directions. You cannot do surgery on somebody who has clothes. I mean, that obviously makes sense. So try to, as a surgeon or a doctor, in this case, I don't know if we're going to end up getting surgeons. I don't know if this may never end up getting fully merged as is. Try to keep all their stuff organized. People don't like losing things. So we did a scalpel. Since they can't feel pain, we're not actually making anything worse because they're on a surgical bed. Then we use a hemostat. Then we use a retractor. Then we use a vascular recoupler. And that is it. We have actually successfully dealt with their arterial bleeding. Of course, you would still want to actually be treating the physical damage itself if you can. I'm not saying just do surgery when they have 150 slash damage, but since we have actually dealt with that, they now have new messages of our surgery that we haven't fully finished yet. It doesn't actually tell you that this target needs any further surgery. It only tells you here if you actually examine them. So once again, grab a surgical tool to see what you need to do. If you just know the steps, you don't have to do this, but we could just click clean up here to finish the surgery. And it depends on what surgery you did, how you clean up. But for fixing arterial bleeds, you just use a cautery. And now we technically did do some, we technically, you heal up the damage that you did to them additionally, and now once you rescan them, if there's no red messages, as mentioned earlier, you don't have to worry about surgery anymore. They are good to go. So now we'll treat them as normal. We can examine here to see if they have any non-bandage cuts. If, for example, for just cuts, you use that. If it's burns, use ointment, aloe cream, whatever. So we could keep doing bruise packs. You could still use medicated sutures. So just as an example, I'll treat them as much as I can with bruise packs. You can have one person throw on bruise packs while another person administers bicard or whatever medicines you need to administrate to get them back into a healthy state. If they're on a surgical table, you don't have to worry about pain. However, you should be using surgical tables on people who are in a worse state because, well, they need to not be in pain, to have their heart beating, to not suffer brain death. So at this point, this person is actually much more stable. You would probably just need to get them out of this table onto a medical bed to help them recover. So now that we move them off, we can see that, yeah, their pain went immediately back to a high level of bad. Their heart rate, though, is stable. They're not going to just suddenly pass out because they don't have a whole ton of damage. You'd want to keep giving them pain meds, though, to help them recover. We'd still want to keep giving them mannitol to help with the brain damage. And it's just a process. It takes a while. Even with the better chems, like say if I were to just start injecting them with a ton of omnazine, that would actually, of course, help a lot. Omnazine's still really good at what it does. So now we have Bicart and Omnazine, so they're going to be getting healed relatively fast. They're on a bed. So they're bad, poor, 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 bad, bad, poor. The heart health will not really heal on its own. This is another thing that requires surgery, as far as I'm aware. I don't believe there's any chemical that directly heals the heart. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I looked for it. I don't think there's anything here. So when I said this person's safe from surgery, that's not really true. So even though we have treated a lot of their damage, their heart is actually beating at a good rate. They have a bad heart health. So even through surgery, even through all of our treatments, all that time is still not enough to actually have gotten this person stable. They are still in a very close and real danger of being round removed. The brain activity jumps all over the place, and honestly, this menu is just so confusing to understand. Like, to me right now, their heart rate's good and everything else being bad doesn't, to me, mean they should still be suffering brain damage. If I retake over their body, you're still, like, able to move around and stuff, even at full speed. I mean, I still have the IV attachment from earlier, but my brain is dying. It's like I understand that they're going for like a realism thing here, but to me, as just like a normal player, nothing here in this UI is screaming to me that this person is on the verge of permadying, because they are literally on the route of permadying. If it wasn't for the mannitol I've been injecting constantly, they probably would have had brain death by now. So you can do surgery to fix heart health. So they have like 0 damage at this point, but I actually can't even give them blood packs because there's no damage you can heal because they don't have any form of blood loss. So I think at this point, like the heart health is what's important. So I guess honestly, like I said, I don't know everything about this system. I've been messing with it for a while, but it's very confusing and in depth, and the UI really does not help you with discovering a lot of this. Oops, I just almost cut them open without even knowing what I'm trying to do. So another surgery you can do is heart treatment, and you either can use sutures, which are found in the surgery crates, or medicated sutures, which heals more of the heart health. I do know that. So let's just cut them back open. Again, they're not suffering any pain on this bed. So we need to kind of work quick though. So scalpel, hemostat, retractor, saw, get that heart open. And like even if you have every step like memorized, this still takes time. So if somebody is really close to brain death, you're in trouble. So at this point now we're suturing them, which is just the final step of this. And their heart health is now still poor, but it's back to 55%. And you could just keep re-spamming the suture on them. So 65% still considered poor. Keep going. Their blood pressure, though, is getting better as we do this. I mean, they are attached to an IV, but I think their blood pressure and blood saturation and blood flow goes up as their heart rate or their heart health gets better. We can see that they're no longer suffering brain damage as well. So from what I can tell, I'm kind of learning this as I go as well, is that doing all of this in conjunction helps the brain activity not go down. However, brain activity also doesn't ever seem to heal on its own, even if a person is fully healthy. So you just have to keep administering very slow mannitol in order to improve this, but we might as well get them back to 100% heart health. All of their vitals are good, but again, once more as a demonstration, even though we did everything right, we have treated them as much as we can, this damage will go away as we finish the surgery. So let's go ahead and recheck the surgery menu, and we'll do clean up. Now, as I mentioned, things are different. So for this surgery to clean up, you actually need a bottle of bone gel. That is not the only step. Then we need a bone setter. So we basically are going through every single tool in the surgery crate to do this. And then another bottle of bone gel. And finally a cautery to end it all. Where did my cautery go? Even in a test environment, I've lost my cautery. Like, trying to deal with this in a real round is going to be terrifying. I know people in Vulture are already testing this, but we have their vitals basically as good as we could possibly get. Throw them back in a medical bed. They still have some pain. It was probably just from the residual damage of the surgery, but they are all good vitals now, and I believe the only thing you could possibly do, you can disconnect them from the IV. I think the only thing you could possibly do to really help this person at this now is just long mannitol injections. If you try to play as somebody with this much brain damage, your screen's just like kind of faded in and out. You can still like you can't really talk to people, but you still can talk. You stutter a lot. I think mannitol at this point, from what I can tell, is just going to be the most important drug in the game. You can use Oppo, which is still rather you can use Oppo in cryo to heal more brain damage. So like it's not, mannitol isn't just the only thing. As far as I could tell, again, that inoperably does not actually help with this because it's not like a critical state. I don't entirely know what stabilizes brain damage actually means, because being in a critical state is like when you're as worse as it gets. As you can see, even that doesn't help with the brain activity. So I think that just maybe helps it not decrease while they're in critical state. I mean, I could test that out, but there's just so much to go through. I've already been recording for a half hour, just trying to learn through it as I'm going. There's just so much more to learn with this. Again, this is more of a showcase and a guide. Even though I've spent hours with this and I'm learning as I go, as you could clearly see that some of this is unorganized because I'm learning as I things I thought I knew, I realized I didn't know. But either way, I think this is a good showcase of the whole system. There are bone fractures you could suffer if you suffer a mix of damage or just get absolutely beat to a pulp. Things are pretty bad. For example, let me just spawn in not a bed. Let me spawn in a fresh urist, and I'll just literally keep cutting them until their vitals are just entirely screwed, because this is another good test of like, if somebody really wants you dead, which this is not an uncommon thing where somebody has to kill you. I keep stabbing them over and over and over again. They now have arterial bleeding. Once they get to the critical state where they have like the little death gasp, you can technically keep doing damage to them, but you start getting diminishing returns on your damage. Like I'm only doing like 3 slash damage a hit now, but this is technically adding wounds. But if somebody really wants you dead and they just cut you up this bad, your heart will keep beating for a while even when suffering this much damage, but it's going to give out. This person's already suffering a large portion of brain damage. In that short time, they've already lost 10% of their brain activity. So unless a paramedic gets to you almost immediately, it is just so difficult to try not to have somebody suffer major damage. Like this person I was dealing with in a rather controlled environment, and they are still very brain damaged. This person I just cut apart, and they're already 20% down. I guess I can use this as an excuse to retest an operative lean real quick. So as a paramedic, let's see. If you inject somebody with an in-app, it does stop their brain. No, it doesn't even seem to stop their brain from dying. So I don't really honestly know what stabilizes brain activity means. Seems like mannitol is really just like your go-to requirement. The emergency medipen in this case, let's see if I can spawn it in before they die, if I can spell. Well, their heart has fully stopped. Even if I inject them at the epi at this point, oh, that actually does help them out a little bit. Their heart health, though, is at 14%, so that's going to require surgery to fix. Their blood flow is about to fall into awful state as well. And, yep, they are back to suffering more brain damage. It seems like the brain activity does stabilize a little bit within that. Maybe it's not decreasing as much. Again, I'm sure this video is confusing. I could spend more time messing with it to make an explanation video. However, I don't think making an explanation video is going to really do any good because everything here is very subject to change. There's a lot of oddities. For example, if you have arterial bleeding and you're totally fine otherwise, like you're fully healthy, 0 damage, you can basically bleed forever with no real penalty. So there's like weird outliers I've noticed like that in my short testing. There's just a lot you're gonna like. You need a very staffed medical department to even deal with a few critical people. Paramedics finding a person who is dying, well, a paramedics finding a person who is dying quickly is very important. Something I also didn't even cover, gibbing is just like no longer really a thing. If you even like, I'll just stick a mini bomb on them to drive the point home. Normally this would gib somebody, but gibbing is just basically a gone concept. So you will just have to sit here and suffer. I detonated a mini bomb right on top of them, and their body is still fine. Fix the spacing so I don't kill myself. Their body's still fine. We'll examine their body, and we'll see. Yeah, now they have systemic bone failure, internal fractures. They have an irrecoverable amount of damage. It made them brain dead pretty much instantly. So, like, their body is absolutely destroyed. There's nothing you could do for this person. It's over for them. Once they have that 0% activity, it's over. So, it's essentially the same thing as giving them. This person's done for. And one last thing to put some concerns aside, because since at this point in original or normal space station you would give this person to get the brain out to borg them, man-machine interfaces can now be used to actually rip the brain out, and that gives a person a pop-up to consent to being borged. So if I just click yes on the other client, it will do a neurological link established, brain will be extracted. You can actually do this on living people from what I was testing. So borging is now consensual, which is awesome. I really like that. Regardless of what ends up happening in this medical system, that should just be normal. In my opinion, borging should be consensual, and it should be able to be done without beating a body to a pulp. So now the brain is removed at this point. It's not like it mattered. This body was pointless anyway. And even though they had full brain damage, they can now talk like normal. So it's really awesome to see that as a side effect of all this. Hopefully this video gives a showcase and explains in general how this all works now. Maybe not the greatest showcase ever, but it's such a complicated thing to learn. I'm also someone who doesn't even play medical normally, so a medical main can probably explain this better to you. Anyways, I'll link the PR in the comments. It's not merge. Again, it's just testing a vulture. I don't know the future of this PR in general or the future of this in space station. We'll see. Thank you for watching.